He was born on a night when thunder split the sky and the earth trembled beneath the footsteps of the wind. The elders said it was a sign. The child would bring either salvation or destruction. His father took the baby in his blood-stained hands and whispered, "The world need not fear if it has a son like this." Thus began the life of Heracles, not as a man, but as a promise. From childhood he was taught to wield a sword before he could speak. While other children played in the shade of olive trees, he lifted stones equal to his own weight and learned not to cry out in pain. Every day was a test for him, every night a trial. He got used to thinking of bruises as marks of duty, not pain. His mum, a priestess at an ancient temple, prayed that her son's strength wouldn't consume his soul. She whispered spells over him as he slept, but even in his dreams he would shudder as if someone's hands were reaching for him from the abyss. He grew up surrounded by legends created about him, the boy who could crush a bull with a single blow, but no one asked if he wanted to. When Hercules became a man, his name became a banner. Warriors uttered it when they went into battle. Mothers when they wanted to scare their children into obedience. His strength became a myth, and the myth became his cage. He carried out the orders of kings, saved cities, fought monsters, but with each feat he felt something alive dying inside him. He saw that behind each of his actions was not valor, but the fear of others for a world they could not hold without him. Then came the day he did not want to remember. The day when his rage, like an ancient beast, broke free from under his skin. He did not remember faces, did not hear screams. When dawn painted the earth, those he loved lay beneath his hands. And then the power that had been admired became a curse. He left without a word. He left his armor, his sword, his name. Barefoot, he walked through the ashes of destroyed villages where he had been called a savior. Since then, he had not sought battles, they found him. Sometimes he helped villages after fires. Sometimes he built bridges. Sometimes he just sat by the fire, staring at the flames, as if trying to understand the language of fire. Each new morning was the beginning of his journey of atonement, but atonement did not come. People still called him a hero, but he knew that a hero was someone who was able to stop, and he couldn't. He became a wanderer, without a homeland, without a name. A dim light burned in his eyes, not hope, but memory. He remembered every face, every cry, every word he hadn't said in time. And yet he kept going, not because he believed in salvation, but because he couldn't allow himself peace. Sometimes children ran after him, throwing stones, thinking he was a giant who had escaped from a fairy tale. Old people looked at his back with reverential fear. He didn't look back. The world loved his strength, but not his pain, and only at night, when the sky was quietly sparkling with stars, did he allow himself to think that perhaps the thunder on the day of his birth was not a prophecy, but a warning. If a person is born with the power to destroy, he must spend his whole life learning to be worthy of creation. For many years after the Exodus, Hercules wandered aimlessly. The world around him lived and died, unaware of his footsteps. Cities were built, destroyed, and rose again from the ashes, while he was everywhere and nowhere. People told stories about a hero who appeared where hope was lost, but no one knew that the hero himself no longer believed in his destiny. He began each day the same way. He woke up before dawn, when the world was still grey and silent, and looked at the horizon as if it were an unanswered question. He did not seek glory. Glory was poison that left only emptiness in his soul. He did not seek forgiveness because he did not know who had the right to forgive. All he wanted was to understand why power was given to those who were afraid to use it. He once believed that heroism purified. Every beast killed, every city saved seemed like a step toward redemption. But over the years, he realized the deeds do not erase the past. They only hide it under a new layer of blood. He began to reject glory. When rulers called on him to defend cities, he remained silent. When people offered him gold, he walked away. And yet, when darkness descended upon the world, he returned. Not for them, for himself. To see if he was capable of not destroying anymore. In one of the valleys, he saved a boy whose village was burning. When the flames died down, the child asked, "Are you a god?" Hercules replied, "If I were a god, I would not be so tired." This phrase became his first prayer, not to heaven, but to himself. He realized that power not controlled by the heart is an empty shell. Then a new desire was born in him, to make power as soft as water so that it could heal rather than destroy. He began to help where no one called for heroes. He rebuilt walls, repaired plows, and taught peasants to fortify their homes so that storms would not destroy their lives. People recognized him, but he asked them not to mention his name. He said, "A name is armor, and I want the wind to pass through me without leaving wounds." But the more he sought peace, the more fate tested him. His old power had not disappeared. It slumbered deep within him, and every time evil came, it drew out the beast he was trying to escape. After each battle, he would sit in silence, listening to his heartbeat, as if checking to see if there was anything human left in him. One night, when the moon looked like a scorched silver trail, he met an old blind singer. The singer asked him to recount how many feats he had accomplished. Hercules replied, "I don't count feats. I count those I couldn't save." The singer smiled and said, "Then you ceased to be a hero. You became a human being, and that is more difficult." These words took root in him like a seed. From then on, his goal changed. He no longer sought redemption. It turned out to be an illusion. He sought balance between strength and peace, between the past and the future, between rage and love. He realized that you cannot fix the world without coming to terms with yourself. And then his path became not a feat, but a pilgrimage into his own soul. Each of his actions now sprang not from duty, but from compassion. He did not destroy his enemies. He sought to understand why they had become enemies. He did not seek reward. He sought meaning. And somewhere, in a forgotten village, an old woman said, "This man once burned the heavens, and now he plants a vineyard." So Hercules smiled for the first time. Not because he was happy, but because for the first time he felt that strength could be not a curse, but a form of forgiveness. Sometimes, at night, when the wind whispered in the empty mountains, Hercules would wake up in a cold sweat. He didn't know where he was. Only ashes under his hands and whispers, as if someone were calling him by a name he no longer bore. He would get up, sit by the dying fire, and stare into the flames. They had always been his mirror. The flames danced, breaking like memories. In them, he saw faces, some begging for help, others for mercy, and none of them disappeared until he turned away. During the day, he walked across the plains, where the earth was cracked like old leather, and wondered why two breaths lived inside him, one human, the other animal. When he saved someone, the human in him wept with compassion. When he fought, the beast roared with delight, and he did not know which of them was stronger and which of them was real. Once on the road, he met robbers. There were 10 of them. They surrounded him, demanding gold, which he did not have. Hercules told them to leave. One laughed and hit him in the face. He did not remember what happened next. Only the sound of bones, the smell of blood, and the silence in which even the wind was afraid to move. When it was over, he stood alone among the bodies, his hands trembling as if they did not belong to him. He felt no rage, only a weariness like grief. He buried the dead, placed a stone over each one, and sat nearby until morning, when the sun colored the earth. Then he whispered, "I did what I didn't want to do again. That means I'm still a monster." These words became both his oath and his curse. From then on, he began to fear not his enemies, but himself. He began to speak more quietly and walk more slowly, as if he wanted to diminish his presence in the world. He stopped being the first to raise his sword and more often went without it altogether. But inside him, strength grew like a storm behind the mountains, waiting for the moment to break out. Sometimes, passing through villages, he saw people bowing before him. They saw him as a hero, but he saw a mark of shame. He envied those who were weak, because weakness is freedom from choice, and he always had to choose, to hold his hand or let it fall. There were days when he prayed to lose his strength. Even for a moment, he wanted to know what it was like to be saved, not to save. But the strength did not go away. It lived in him like breath, like the memory of an ancient beast that had once been set free. Sometimes he felt the beast whispering inside him, "You were created for destruction. Everything else is a lie." Then Hercules would clench his hands into fists until they bled and reply, "No, I was created for choice." This dispute never ended. It raged within him like a war that could not be won. Once, in the mountains, he found a cave and stayed there for many days. He did not eat or sleep, only listened to the silence. And when he finally spoke to himself, his voice was hoarse, like old metal. "If I kill the beast within me, will I remain alive? And if I let it go, who will die instead of me?" The answer did not come. But that night, when he left the cave, his eyes were different, not softer, but deeper. He realized that the beast inside him was not an enemy. It was part of his heart, the part that could protect him when his mind trembled. He understood that power without will is destruction, but power without compassion is emptiness. Since then, he has not tried to suppress the beast. He learned to talk to it. Sometimes they argued. Sometimes they were silent together. And perhaps, in that silence, he felt peace for the first time, fragile, unstable, but real. And yet, when clouds gathered over the world, he knew that the storm would raise his hand again. And each time, before striking, he whispered, not a prayer, but a reminder. "I am not a monster. I am a man who keeps a monster on a chain of light." He encountered his first enemy in the desert, where the sand burned like molten gold. His name was Zeus, and he was a warrior untouched by time. Zeus said that people were dust, and that power existed only for the sake of power. He lived in eternal battle, like a storm that needed no meaning. They clashed under the blinding sun, and each of their blows sounded like thunder. When Hercules knocked his opponent down, he laughed and said, "You have defeated me, but have you defeated what is in me?" Only then did Hercules understand that Ector was not an enemy, but the embodiment of the rage he had tried to stifle all his life. He buried him under the sand, but he knew that rage does not die. It waits to be called upon. He met his second enemy by the river. A woman in a white cloak stood in the middle of the water and sang. She called herself Thalia, the keeper of mirrors. Her power lay not in her sword, but in her reflection she revealed everything that a person hid from themselves. When Hercules approached, the water in her hands became smooth, and he saw himself not as a warrior, not as a hero, but as a creature whose body was covered in blood, both his own and that of others. He recoiled, but the mirror did not disappear. Thalia said, "You cannot destroy what you do not accept." He smashed the mirror with his fist, and the water turned scarlet. She fell to her knees and said, "Now you are free from the reflection, but not from the one who looks." Since then, Hercules has been afraid to look into water, even rain. The third enemy did not come from outside. It was Lysander, the leader of the people Heracles had saved many years ago. They admired him until they realized that the hero did not want to be their idol. Then admiration turned to hatred. "You gave us hope, and then you took it away," Lysander said, holding a sword to his chest. "We followed you because we believed you were a god, but you turned out to be just a man." Hercules lowered his gaze. "And that's my fault?" "Yes, because you allowed us to dream." They fought not for their lives, but for an idea. When Lysander fell, Hercules wept for the first time in many years. He realized that he had created enemies out of those he had tried to save. The fourth was the last. He had no name, no face. He came to Hercules in a dream, on the night when the wind blew stardust across the sky. Hercules stood in the middle of a battlefield, littered with the shadows of everyone he had ever killed. From these shadows rose a silhouette made of darkness and ashes, and spoke with his voice. "You burned the earth to save the sky. You killed for peace. What did you save, Hercules?" He rushed forward, and the battle was silent. Each blow left no blood, but left a memory, a face, a cry, a glance. When he finally fell to his knees, the shadow touched his chest and whispered, "I am you when you stop resisting." Then Hercules rose and embraced the darkness, and it disappeared. Since then, enemies have come to him less often, not because there are fewer of them, but because he has stopped seeing them as strangers. He realized that every battle is a reflection of an inner struggle. Once he fought to prove that he was not a monster. Now he fought to understand how much humanity could be preserved in a blow. Sometimes, passing by those who raised their swords against him, he simply said, "If you see me as an enemy, it means that I have reminded you of something inside you." Some dropped their weapons, others attacked and fell, but everyone who met him left changed. And when one boy once asked, "Why don't you kill your enemies?" Hercules replied, "Because they are the only ones who tell me the truth. Every morning, Hercules woke up long before dawn. The world was still asleep, and only the wind rolled the ashes across the ground. He sat down by the fire where the coals were burning out, and the first thing he did was look at his hands. The scars on his palms, white and uneven, stretched like the roads of the old world. He traced them with his finger, as if rereading his own biography. Sometimes he whispered, "Alive," and only then did he begin his day. It was his way of convincing himself that he was still a man, not a legend created by the fear of others. When Hercules ate, he did so in silence. He never took the first portion, even when he was alone. The habit remained from the days when there were always others at the table, soldiers, peasants, women, children, and he ate last. Now, even when alone, he would put his food aside and wait, as if someone were supposed to come. Then, without waiting, he would take a piece of bread and say a short word, "I share." This is how he fed his memory, not himself. When evening fell, he gathered dry branches, lit a fire, and talked to the flames. Not as to a god, not as to a friend, but as to a being equal in loneliness. The fire crackled and responded with sparks. Hercules bowed his head as if listening. He asked the fire about things he did not understand. Why strength kills the weak, why light gives birth to shadow, where love disappears when war comes. Sometimes the fire was silent. Sometimes it hummed as if it were laughing. Once it whispered to him, "I hear you." Since then, he talked to the flames every day, as if they were the voice of his inner beast. He always slept by the door or the window, even when he knew there was no danger. He couldn't help it. His body chose the place from which he could get up instantly. At first, he thought it was just caution, but then he realized it was a guard's instinct. He slept not for rest, but for readiness. Sometimes at night, when the wind stirred the shutters, he would wake up and grab his knife. Then, after making sure that all was quiet, he would sit down and stare into the darkness for a long time, as if searching for a face he must not forget. On the road, he always collected stones, small, dull, shapeless. He put them in his bag without explaining to himself why. When he came to a new place where someone had died, he laid out a circle of stones, as if creating an eternal home for them. People said it was magic. He knew it wasn't. It was just a memory that needed a place to breathe. Before going to sleep, he often did the same thing. He took a small piece of fabric, worn and almost colorless. It had once been the tunic of the woman he loved. He folded it neatly, like a sacred scroll, and held it in his palm until his breathing became steady. He did not pray, he just looked at it until his eyes closed. This fabric was all that remained of the past, when he was not yet a hero, when the name Hercules meant nothing. And finally, there was one last habit, the strangest one. Sometimes he would walk past a mirror, a pool of water, or a smooth piece of metal, and never look at his reflection. He was afraid of not seeing a monster. He was afraid of not recognizing a human being. Only once, in an old temple, did he dare to look up at the mirrored surface of a shield. There was a man with a tired face and eyes that trembled with the silence of many worlds. He looked at himself for a long time, then said quietly, "I am not a hero. I just survived." That's how his habits lived, like invisible threads holding his mind together. Each one a memory, each one a confession, each one a prayer, spoken without words. They made him not a legend, but a man who had seen too much, and was still trying to remember how not to become a stone among the living.